Following the release of Jinhsi and Changli in version 1.1 of Wuthering Waves, we now have a first glimpse of the general direction the game is taking in regards to characters and combat priorities. It should go without saying that conclusive judgments on the metagame will demand far more time and empirical data, but now that the game has been out for roughly 2 months, the community at large is beginning to develop a better understanding of the game's mechanics and systems. From our experiences in Genshin, players came into Wuthering with the impression that what worked in that game should more or less work here, only to find out things are a lot different. Throughout version 1.0, the central theme of discussion has been team building. What are the best teams for each character? Which can be tricky given the combat mechanisms for this game placing great emphasis on coordination, swap cancelling, and extended rotations, which has only gotten more paramount with the new units of 1.1, both having elaborate combat rotations in their own respects. With all that said, I wanted to make a video analyzing the current state of the team building meta for the game, how to use that to build any team regardless of who you're playing, and what to expect moving forward. The prevailing consensus on team construction for Wuthering at the moment is that you want to have either 2 damage dealers and 1 healer, or 3 damage dealers if you're confident in dodging everything and can triple sword cancel without thinking. Presently, the game has yet to release any truly dedicated support character who primarily focuses on buffing, crowd control, things of that nature. There's been a running joke where every team is guaranteed to have Verena or Baidue purely because there's no other alternative for support besides them. Technically, Jinhsi can fill the role of a healing shielding support with a bit of grouping, but due to her forte circuit demanding more field time than is currently worth, her diverse, albeit jack of all trades playstyle doesn't lend itself to efficient clears in the endgame, so people don't even use her forte. That leaves us with the other 2 party members. Unlike in Genshin where you typically have 1 main damage dealer and 2 offfielders with abilities that persist after rotating out, Wuthering adopts a more double carry strategy courtesy of its more tandem attack system. The presence of swap cancelling, being the ability to switch to another character, affords players a number of ways to increase DPS while at the same time reducing downtime in between attacks. With parties only consisting of 3 spots, you basically want to bring out your support to set up heals, shields, whatever buffs you have, and then spend the rest of your rotation alternating between the 2 damage dealers. People have already suspected this would be the case, as evident by some of the early meta team counts we've had so far. The rule of thumb for building the best pair is to first look at a character's outro skill. Outro skills are the focal point of many units due to how long they last and how strong they can be when utilized to the fullest. Furthermore, they can give you a good indication of whether the character likes or cares about swapping, making choosing the rest of your team much more straightforward. As a basic example, Havoc, Rover, and Dungeon pair well together despite both units requiring substantial field time to execute their full rotations by virtue of Dungeon's outro skill, a 23% Havoc damage deepen for 14 seconds. Meanwhile, Havoc Rover can still contribute DPS when swapping out since her outro summons a damaging field. Right now though, Dungeon's outro is the focus. Since most of Rover's damage is spread across a number of attacks like normals, skill, liberation, and echoes, she's a more all-covering partner than the likes of Mortefi who only strengthens heavy attacks for his outro skill. The second thing is what the priorities of each unit are and how well they can be woven together. A good example of this would be Jinhsi and Yinlin. Both units want to swap cancel as much as possible, so their interests align with one another. You swap Jinhsi out to Yinlin to cancel Jinhsi's animation, and then swap Yinlin out to Jinhsi to cancel Yinlin's animation, and keep going back and forth between the 2. Both have incentives to swap out for maximum DPS. More on that later. Obviously, there are more specific interactions based on character, but those are the 2 staple things you should keep in mind when building any team. Having established that, I want to bring up the 2 new units, Jinhsi and Changli, and apply that formula to them to infer their best teams. While this video is meant to give you a basic understanding of how to build any party, I figure we should talk about the 2 most relevant characters right now. With Jinhsi having been out for the past few weeks already, she's markedly cemented herself as one of if not the best DPS unit in the game. The sheer ease of use in a toolkit relative to the amount of damage you can deal with her puts her in a league of her own at the moment, especially thanks to Jue being a summon echo rather than a transformation that stacks towards her forte circuit. Jinhsi's outro is responsible for stacking up her forte circuit, which is then responsible for amplifying the DPS of her giant dragon laser attack upon 4 empowered basic attacks during incarnation. The way she accumulates her forte is by having her party members inflict damage of their own, and especially through coordinated attacks. By using her outro skill though, it accelerates the process of building up her forte. This alone should tell you 2 things. 1. Jinhsi wants to swap out so she can power up her forte gauge as quickly as possible, and 2. She wants anyone who can dish out coordinated aka follow-up attacks. This should narrow down the pool of who can work with her to roughly about 4 units at the moment. First and most accessible being Yuanwu. Yuanwu is all about coordinated attacks. His own personal damage and whatnot is kind of negligible at this point. You're really mostly bringing him for a steady stream of electro follow-ups to rack up Jinhsi's forte. He also requires almost no field time. All you have to do is activate his skill and then get right back out. Another potential candidate would be Yinlin. Unlike Yuanwu, who likes to play more hands-off, playing Yinlin with Jinhsi will very much come down to a question of skill issue. Yinlin does have coordinated attacks, but accessing them without compromising DPS is by far the most challenging. However, when executed correctly, you not only get someone who can rack up Jinhsi's forte, but she does significantly more damage than Yuanwu. You just need to have your mechanics on point. Regarding Mortefi, since everyone knows them for coordinated attacks, apparently Jinhsi's incarnation attacks don't trigger his follow-up attack for some reason, making using him in a traditional sense a bit weird for her. That's not to say he can't work with her, but there is a bit of jank in the way the two interact with each other that make using him with Jinhsi a little more cumbersome. Support-wise, the last one you need is Verena. On top of being one of like only 3 options for supports, Verena has follow-up attacks, making her far and away the best healer for Jinhsi. In addition, Verena can stack up her Concerto extremely quickly, letting her make liberal use of her outro skill, a 15% all-elemental damage amp for a whopping 30 seconds, giving Jinhsi basically everything she wants: follow-up attacks, buffs, and more importantly, intro skills. Using Jinhsi's intro skill gives her an instant activation of Incarnation, accelerating her rotation since you don't have to do 4 basic attacks beforehand. All in all, taking into account Jinhsi's 2 main priorities being coordinated attacks and spamming intro-outro, the best party for her would be herself and 2 units of coordinated attacks, Yuanwu, Yinlin, or Mortefi with sequences, and then Verena for support. So if in the near future we get more units who can offer follow-up attacks, that will be someone else Jinhsi can work with. With Changli having been released by the time you see this video, I'm sure many have been excited for her due to her suggestive personality. I don't have a type, you're just imagining things. Anyway, Changli's gameplay is not quite as straightforward to understand as Jinhsi, and it's been leaving people more skeptical about how strong she would be, especially given our limited selection of characters. Nonetheless, let's apply the same tempo for team building to her. First and foremost, outro skill. Changli's outro offers a 10-second buff to the unit tagging in that provides a 20% fusion damage amp and 25% liberation damage amp, an incredibly significant buff. Similar to Yinlin, only Yinlin's is Electro. Naturally, the first potential party member on everyone's mind should be Encore, the poster child, in this case literally, of the fusion element. Unfortunately, even though Encore depends on her ultimate for the bulk of her damage, her liberation doesn't actually deal damage, it just buffs her with superpowered attacks and skills. However, the fusion damage is still something to make note of. There actually hasn't been a fusion damage deep in natural skill yet, so most people have been using Sanhua for her staggering 38% basic attack amp. Changli's fusion damage amp can empower basic attacks, heavy attacks, skills, the whole shebang. Encore's DPS is spread across all manner of attacks, making Changli a better partner for swapping around. But what this also means is we currently do not have a character, or at least a 5-star character, who can take full advantage of both parts of Changli's outro skill. But if and when someone comes out who's all about liberation damage and this fusion element, that's Changli's match made in heaven right there. Second part is to look at her main priority, since outro skill alone does not make or break a character. Like Jinhsi, Changli wants to cap out her forte circuit as quickly as possible because doing so will unleash a massive blast of damage. To pull this off, you can either immediately max out her forte by using her liberation or by using 4 True Sight attacks. True Sight can be obtained in 4 ways. 1. Her intro skill automatically activates True Sight. 2. Her skill puts her in True Sight as well. 3. After 4 basic attacks, or 4 after 4 aerial attacks. In other words, you have to enter True Sight 4 times to prime her forte. Her intro can give her 1 and her skill can give her 2, meaning you just have to get the last one from 4 basic attacks. With this in mind, it's abundantly clear that Changli is a backloaded damage dealer. You can max out her burst rotation by organically charging her forte circuit for the first explosion, then use her ultimate to instantly prime 4 stacks to then explode again, at which point Changli has exhausted her rotation and should swap out. Because her forte circuit builds up incrementally, you can play her in a lot of different ways. Technically, Changli will take a fair bit of field time based on what we've seen before, but since you can stagger her rotation, she's not strictly a hyper carry type attacker. You can tandem attack with her and someone else. Further lending credence to that is the fact that her intro skill is one way she can consistently acquire True Sight. So if you want, you can routinely alternate between her and another party member capable of instantly priming their respective concertos, repeatedly proccing intro and outros between them and her to cap out her own damage. Changli and Yinlin can work well with each other since Yinlin can also spread her attacks out, and they both have liberation damage amps that can help each other since both of them do place a lot of damage into their respective ults. Alternatively, you can have Changli go through a full rotation like the one we talked about and then swap out to another character such as Encore, who also wants to do her own thing for a while, and keep rotating between the two. So essentially, Changli is similar to Yinlin and Sanhua, where they're technically designed to deal their own damage, but they have the ability to play with other units compared to say Jian, who wants the spotlight to himself due to his ultimate comprising the majority of his damage. Obviously for support, again it's pretty much Verena. She can stack up easy buffs and Concerto to assist Changli in obtaining more True Sight. So I guess to condense Changli, her outro skill is a great benefit to any fusion element character with an ultimate that deals damage, and in regards to her playstyle, she's an incremental backloaded damage dealer, giving you the option to either go straight for that backloaded damage or to steadily work towards it alongside someone else, making her pretty open-ended. Jinhsi and Changli both have playstyles dependent on maxing out your forte gauge through liberal use of intro and outro skills, so going forward it's important to keep track of those. Mind you, there's no guarantee that future units will also be focused on quick swapping. You might have someone who comes out who doesn't care at all about quick swapping like GN, in which case you want to focus on teammates that can give him long-lasting buffs and then stay out of his way. Or on the flip side, you might have someone whose forte circuits are relevant and they're all about skill or liberation damage or something, in a similar fashion to Yuanwu and Mortefi. See, theory crafting for Wuthering Waves is significantly more complex on account of all the different mechanics and underlying factors that don't make themselves too clear to the player from the get-go. As such, it can be difficult to tell who is definitively the most efficient with who. It's also because there's so many variables that can get in the way. Depending on who you're fighting, some enemies like to run around a lot or have moments where you just cannot hit them no matter what. You also have to worry about parrying and dodging, all that stuff. But in a way, I think that can also simplify things too. With so many things that can go wrong, it's unrealistic to expect the very maximum of something, meaning you can run a quote-unquote suboptimal team and play it really well, and to outperform someone who runs the optimal team but plays it poorly. To wrap things up, the basic principle of team building in Wuthering Waves is less about all resources going to one person like a hypercarry, or all resources going to a central win condition like achieving elemental reactions in Genshin. Instead, you want to pair units up on the basis of mutual gain. It might feel counterintuitive to have two units with long field times together, but on occasion they can work together and produce an outcome more beneficial than if you were to just focus on one entirely, whether by swap cancelling or capitalizing on their respective intro and outro skills. I think that's what I like about Dungeon and Havoc Rover so much. They're both units who want to run point, but through specific parts of their kit you can run both of them together quite nicely. I will say though, much of that is because the main issue with team building at the moment is the lack of actual options. For example, Changli and Encore work decently together because there aren't that many dedicated supports in the game. It's effectively just Farina and Baitu. We don't have supports who can battery forte gauges and the like, although considering each unit has their own forte mechanic, I can understand why. As it stands, Wuthering's team building meta feels less about mixing and matching units for a targeted goal, and more figuring out if you can use two characters together in a way that doesn't cause them to step over each other. I do hope in the future the team building meta evolves into something more cohesive, but for the time being, that's my two-step plan on figuring out teammates. 1. Find out what their actual skill does, and 2. Find out what their main focus is in their kit. Forte, ultimate, basic attack, skill, what have you, and which teammates can best optimize that playstyle and vice versa. If you have any questions on this, you're welcome to leave them in the comments down below, but for now, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Wuthering Waves content if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.